Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining our session. I am Christina Lavania, and I'm a member of the leadership team for Project Impact, which is the host for today's conference. And I would like to welcome everyone to our session and introduce our teacher, our speaker for today. We have Margaret Carr, who's going to lead us in a session today, Teaching and Learning with Joy. Margaret is a teacher at Krim Elementary School in Bowling Green City Schools. She's a kindergarten teacher, and Margaret's also a member of our Leadership Studies doctoral program. She's finished with all of her coursework. She's at the dissertation phase, and I know that as one of the faculty members, I'm biased, but I can promise you it's an absolute fact that Margaret is a rock star. So we're really, really fortunate to spend time with her this morning. Margaret, is there anything you want me to make sure I do in the chat or anything? Are there any links that I need to manage?
No, everyone should have received a link that says for a joy infographic, and you'll all need that for today. So if anyone has any difficulty with that link, please feel free to let me know that. I have my phone here that keeps timing out, and no matter how hard I tried to figure that out, I can't see the timer. So sometimes timekeeping is probably an issue of mine. So I'm going to do my best to stay on time. But if you notice us getting slight on time, please let me know.
Okay, so I will let you know, Margaret. I'm going to send you a direct message when we have 10 minutes left.
Sure.
For everyone else on the Zoom call, I'll be managing the chat and monitoring that. So I'm going to pay attention to the activity in the chat. And if there's something specific that I need to kind of run up the flagpole for Margaret, I'll try to do that. And then I'll answer things as I can. With that, just as a reminder also, the session is being recorded. And with that, I'm going to mute and hand it over to Margaret. And thank you again so much, Margaret, for being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And was everyone able to get the link? I put it back in. I put it in right away, but it's the very first link in the chat, the very first message. So if anyone's having any difficulty with that link, please feel free to let me know. You won't necessarily need that at the beginning, but we will need it a little bit later in the presentation. So I am going to share screen, hopefully. And is everyone good with the screen? Can we see that? I can't see you.
I can see your screen, Margaret.
Yes, perfect. I can see it too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just want to take a minute to thank everyone for being here and to take your Saturday morning for some teaching and learning with joy. On the upside, it's a pretty fun topic that I'm very, very passionate about. So real quick, just to go over the agenda, I shared that infographic link, which you will need. I'm going to take about 5 minutes for us to get to know each other, because one of the topics that we're going to cover later in this presentation is just the idea of belonging. And that's essential whether you're working with people for 40 minutes or whether you're working with students or teachers or leaders for years and years. So after that, we'll do a couple of thinking activities. And again, talking a little bit later, I'm going to mention the importance of displaying student work, but let's not get lost on the thought that one of your most important parts is thinking, and thinking is a messy, invisible process. So that is some very important work that we might not always see the benefits of on display, but it's there. I will share with you a brief overview of the research that I've been doing for my dissertation. I will try to keep that to under 10 minutes, because really, the most important part of this presentation is going to be teaching you some ways that you might be able to teach like Finland. Not teach as you're in Finland, but teach like Finnish educators do, and some of the priorities that they have on happiness and joy. and how you can put those into your classrooms on Monday, or put them into your lesson plans if you're a pre-service teacher, or if you're a leader, maybe inspire your teachers to do the same, or if you're a teacher who is also a leader, inspire some of your colleagues to do the same. And if you're a teacher, you're most likely already a leader. And then lastly, we'll follow up with an activity. What does this look like in practice? And that's where you're going to need that infographic. So real quick about me. I have 4 children. I live in Bowling Green. I teach at Crim Elementary School. These are my 4 kids. Please feel free to interrupt this presentation if you notice a 5-year-old on a hoverboard trying to balance her cereal and who knows what else, scissors perhaps. Please interrupt. They are running around the house right now trying to keep our 13-year-old Springer Spaniel quiet from barking at every person that walks by. You'll see me at 4-H events, lots of animal things, lots of outside time. Whenever we get snow, all fingers crossed, our kids love building snowmen, things like that. So some quick facts. I am currently a doctoral candidate and I am focusing on joy for my dissertation. I went to Kent State University and Ashland University for a bachelor's and a master's, and I am enjoying my time in BG. We moved here about 4 years ago, and previously I was an adjunct lecturer in Merrimack College. This is my 18th year teaching. Predominantly years in kindergarten, but I've also taught special education, heavy emphasis on English learners, and some other situations such as the 1.5 years on Nova, where I was teaching exclusively virtual during the pandemic. So I want you to first get your mindset wrapped around some joy. And I want you to look at these 6 pictures, and I want you to think about which one were you as a student. Were you the child that loved to play in the house center? Were you the kid that just loved creative writing, couldn't get enough of running outside on the playground, or swinging or reading, maybe building a robot or engaging in science activities? So think about what brought you joy as a student or as a child. As many of you may be students and teachers now. And now I want you to think about who you are now. What brings you joy now as an adult? Is it maybe cooking or teaching? Maybe it's a really awesome strategic planning meeting or the law. Maybe you like to go hiking or explore the outdoors, rafting. Because chances are what brings you joy now and what brought you joy as a child, there are commonalities in that, because joyful experiences really do have a great deal of commonalities. One of those commonalities is a sense of belonging. So in order for us to feel that sense of belonging, I'd like you to just take a minute, put your first name, your current role, and one activity that brings you joy. Always good to lead with an example. So one example you might write in the chat feature is, my name is Molly. I teach 3rd grade in Youngstown City Schools. Cooking brings me joy. All right. And I'm just going to take a minute to view the chat as well so that I can get to know my learners a minute. I think I can do that. All right, so I see gardening, painting, woodworking, knitting, hiking, watching your kids, volleyball, rappelling, travel, healthy habits. So many different things that bring you joy. Let me go back to this slideshow here. And I want you to think about one specific experience that brought you joy. It might be what you just mentioned. It might be what brings you joy all the time, or it could be a specific event that you can recall using that initial slide when you were little, or maybe when you've grown up, maybe where you are right now, maybe you're in between. So think about something that really brings you joy. And when thinking about that activity, I want you to type just one word that describes that joyful experience for you. All right. And think through this chat situation here very well. All right, so some of the things I noticed were relationships, things that are hands-on, mastery, which thank you for throwing out that word because we will be discussing mastery, togetherness, peace. We will be talking about peace, discovery, connection. And so really a lot of these words that you described are things that your students would find to be a joyful experience, or your fellow teachers, your fellow leaders find to be a joyful experience. So when we think about joy in teaching and learning, really joy has to do with feeling like you're seen, feeling that you're heard, and then experiencing very specific feelings such as curiosity, excitement, possibly disturbance, wonder. And joy, we sometimes think about as smiles and laughter, but really it's a happiness that goes beyond regular happiness. It's sincere, meaningful engagement. And I've been studying creating a qualitative study to explore the perceived impact of Finnish principles, and how there might be some driving and restraining forces based on our guest speaker, the first speaker of the morning, Mona. She mentioned that there are some forces that may work against us in education today to really prioritize joy. The current literature is rather sparse in the United States when looking at joyful engagement in learning, but there are many, many other words that talk about the importance of putting joy in learning. Play is a common word that we read about, autonomy, choice, really looking at creativity and outdoor time. The concept of happy schools, happy and joy is often used synonymously. So really this study is going to combine elements from past research, and it defines joy as learning as enthusiasm and expressed happiness towards learning experiences that may include success, achievement, curiosity, wonder, and interest in learning just for the sake of learning. Now, some of the current research you might be well aware of is that there's a lot of policy and legislation that is focused on standardization, accountability, and competition. And this has been linked to a lot of stress and anxiety for teachers. And as we heard first thing this morning, a lot of teacher turnover. And we're concerned about some of those, the teacher retention rate and the lack of people joining the teaching force. So some of the outcomes that we are noticing are that academic performance and well-being is below that of other nations where their primary focus has extended on equity. It's been really focused on equity rather than that standardization, competition, accountability. And also this morning, we talked briefly about the hierarchy of leadership. And in many of these other countries, it's less about a hierarchy of leadership and more about a collaborative atmosphere. So the study that I'm creating is really focusing, looking at the strategies on a joy menu and how we can implement these Finnish principles for joyful teaching and learning into our own classrooms and think about that impact, but also to think about what some of the benefits and potential barriers might be. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And this is absolutely one of my favorite quotes because we really need to be focused on what we can do to change the environment within the four walls of the classrooms in which we're teaching. To provide an international context for this research, I did look at curricular practices of Singapore, Finland, and Canada. And really all three countries that focus on equity suggest that there are more effective ways that we can simultaneously support academic achievement and well-being. And at the same time, we can preserve trust and autonomy for leaders, teachers, and teacher leaders. Because leaders and teachers, though I separate them at some points during this research, they can definitely be one and the same. Just to give you some quick snapshots of data, these three countries are doing significantly better when ranked against the United States on PISA data. And also these countries are, if we look at Finland in particular, they show that there's a very small between schools difference. Wherever you go to school in Finland, you're having a great school experience. Where that's a difference in the United States, our schools have a much higher between school variation in performance. Additionally, the World Happiness Report ranks Finland first. And so even though I looked at those three countries, I'm really prioritizing the views of Finland because they were the only country to have high reading satisfaction and high student well-being. And additionally, in general, their population is considered the happiest in the world. And one probably wouldn't be too surprised to find out that joy is actually prioritized as a learning concept in Finland. And one of the indicators that identifies happiness is the freedom to make life choices. And you are going to hear some ways to put freedom and put choice into your classroom. So this is a really fancy way of showing you what the research is going to look like. In the state of Ohio, there are 8 different typologies of schools, and I'm looking to take a teacher and a leader, or it may be a teacher, leader, and another teacher. But a teacher, although they have certain leadership components, I'm really looking for someone that is in a classroom as a teacher and someone that is not necessarily in the classroom as a leader. And looking at their perspective when trying to implement Finnish practices or Finnish principles from this joy menu. So if we sprinkle some joy into our classrooms, what exactly might happen? And while we're trying to sprinkle joy into our classrooms, what are some of the driving forces that would encourage this change to occur? And what are some of the restraining forces that might inhibit this change and try to keep the status quo, where the emphasis is mainly on accountability competition? So I am using purposeful sampling, purposive sampling, and I'm looking for maximum variation, meaning I want to make sure we get Toledo Public Schools and Ottawa Hills School. I want to see a leader and a teacher from each typology of school and compare what are the driving and restraining forces. Are you up against different things in different places? And for my data collection procedure, those that choose to participate in the study will be asked to take a Qualtrics survey, to complete a pre and a post journal entry, as well as a midpoint journal entry, which is on a Google form. And I will be conducting semi-structured interviews to be able to identify some of these driving and restraining forces and to identify which menu items are most appealing to teachers and what are implemented most often. So the reason I'm creating this research is that I would really like to create a grounded theory from this analysis. I would like to identify driving and restraining forces when we're trying to implement proven principles that are designed to help people be more happy. What's the drawback here? Why wouldn't we want to incorporate that into all schools? And then apply that understanding to policy implications. And lastly, create a joy model so that this study can be replicated or used to just incorporate joy into classrooms. With that being said, I want to make sure that I get to the important part of this presentation, and that's how you can implement what I have discovered from the research into your classrooms right now, tomorrow, when you go back. So looking at the work of Timothy D. Walker, who's an author, and Pasi Sahlberg. Pasi Sahlberg is from Finland, and Timothy D. Walker is from Boston. And they basically switched places and taught in the opposite place for about 2 years. That Timothy D. Walker wrote from the perspective of teaching middle school. And he created this book, Teach Like Finland. Now, I want you to look closely at the word like. I am not telling you that you can recreate Finnish practices in the United States without any regard to culture. What I am simply saying from the book, and what Timothy D. Walker asserts, is that we can take strategies that Finland uses culturally and daily in their practice, and we can take things like these practices and incorporate them into our classrooms to increase happiness and joyful teaching and learning. Now, he really talks about the ingredients of happiness in the context of a joyful classroom. Well-being, belonging, autonomy, mastery, mindset. These are really the areas that he focuses on in the text. This presentation is far too short to focus on all of them. So I have selected 16 for your infographic that we will really be looking at. But if you have any interest, I did give you a link for the book. It's only about $15 used right now and maybe $18 new. It's a really great investment. It doesn't matter to me at all if you want to purchase it, but I do find it to be really helpful, and I'm using that information every day in my classroom. So the ingredients of happiness, he said, were mastery, autonomy, well-being, belonging, mindset. And he added one of these because he really wanted to think about this in the context of the classroom. So when looking at this, if you're thinking about scheduling brain breaks, you might look at this and say, I already schedule brain breaks. Everyone knows that brain breaks work for their students. But what he really wants people to think about, and what they do innately in Finland is that brain breaks are designed to maximize learning. It's not a break from learning. It's a strategic way to get the most out of learning when learners return to your scheduled lesson. And this is proven to be what we would call pulsing. And if you really stop and think about your classroom, are you the type of teacher that understands the value of pulsing, which means you're switching between work and rest? I know that when I think about my practice, I'm really engaged in that sense of urgency, and I want my students to be active and working hard and really getting the most out of their school day. But if I stop and think about it, I forgot about pulsing and the need for rest. And you'll see one of the others under well-being is keeping the peace. And I saw someone in the chat earlier wrote down peace as one of the things that they remember about their joyful experience. And this is connected to happiness and well-being. And so the way this looks in my classroom right now is we are really dedicated to making sure our writing workshop is full of peace. We've talked about the word, we've talked about what it means, we've talked about what calm and quiet means. Is it perfect? Far and away, not at all. But we are working towards that so that I can really focus on their happiness and well-being. Simplifying your space, decluttering, trying to make your space organized, trying to make sure there is white space or blank space on your walls is something else that is heavily prioritized in Finland. They often talk about the less is more mantra. If you go into a Finnish home, it mirrors a classroom. You would want to see only things that you're using for teaching. Breathing fresh air is proven in the research over and over again to be conducive to learning and to joy and to well-being and to happiness. So opening a window and giving children the opportunity to open a window on their own is a tiny piece of freedom that often leads to more joy in a classroom and is linked to increased academic achievement. If we look learning on the move, making sure students are active, thinking about your classroom, are students moving around? Are they getting up? One of the suggestions he gave for older students was a standing room only approach with discussion. All right, kids, we're going to have a class discussion about the book we just read, standing room only, let's go. And everybody just stands because again, getting students moving and being active is also an important part of the learning process. If we look at belonging, knowing each child, I think most people know that the importance of that, but getting to know your students both with academic work and also outside of academic work. In Finland, children have 3 math classes and 3 music classes for 45 minutes each for the entire week. So really they spend a lot of time getting to know students as well-rounded individuals, not just in math and literacy or science or social studies, but all the way around. They celebrate their learning. And again, thinking is not always able to be celebrated by displaying your work. So thinking about celebrating thinking and how you could do that with your students, playing with your students. Oh, I know anybody that's not in kindergarten, or maybe not in preschool, get scared when we say the word play, but play is an invaluable resource to your students' learning. It is not a break from learning. It should not be viewed as a brain break, but rather it should be used as a joyful practice where we can get students engaged in play. And believe it or not, years and years ago in 1930, we did guarantee children's right to play and comradeship and joy with their peers. So this is not a foreign concept to our country in any way, but many times joyful practices have been reserved for schools where we pay a significant amount of money for students to go, and we sometimes lose sight of this emphasis in public education. Mindset, seeking flow, and really your flow just means that you're so engaged in your work that, well, this is a very nutshell version, but if you're so engaged in your work that you just keep going with it, you forget that you're even working, you're just excited about what you're doing. And mastery is another ingredient of happiness. We're going to teach the essentials. Teaching didn't just go away. It's still very, very important because remember, one of the components of joy is that students are experiencing success. We're leveraging the tech. In Finland, technology is seen as a way to accelerate the curriculum, but never as a replacement for curriculum. We would never put students they would not put students on a computer for hours and expect them to make great gains from it. Mining the textbook, really that looks like you're mining for gems. You're looking what is the big, most important idea, and you're using these joyful opportunities to get students to that big idea. So if you can do this important lesson by mining a small piece from the textbook and incorporating other areas of well-being, then do so. And the other one that really is a huge emphasis of the study is autonomy. Rather than spending the first 2 weeks of school making sure students are micromanaged and they know every single procedure, Finnish educators believe that the first couple of weeks should be a slow start and that we should really focus on giving students freedom and seeing what they can do with that. Now, to do that in the United States, there's a significant cultural barrier, but you've known your students now for at least a couple of quarters. So is there harm in saying, you know what, we're going to start writing workshop today with some freedom. This is the topic I want you to write about. Go and just see what happens. Worst case scenario, you start over the next morning. But you have that opportunity to have autonomy because you gave autonomy to your students. More autonomy for students typically means more autonomy for teachers, and this gives time for meaningful independent work. The one I've really been focusing on lately is leaving margin. I always like to build in flexibility into my lessons. Margin is synonymous with flexibility. What this means is rather than leaving flexibility at the end of your lesson or at the beginning of your lesson, leave it during the lesson where students are engaged in independent work, and that frees you up to help those students who need it the most. But purposely planning for that margin in your lessons, and then offering choices. And if it's a choice time, it should really have 3 components. It should be an independent time where students are allowed to make independent choices. It should be novelty. It should be new. So if you've spent 30 minutes in reading workshop, it shouldn't be, okay, kids, your choice time is to read a book. And there should be heavy enjoyment in the choice time if you're going to count it as choice. All right. So again, just to go over flow, since that's really one of the words that's hard to, if you haven't heard it before, it might be hard to remember on the menu for our upcoming activity. What you feel when you're doing things that are so enjoyable that you want to pursue them for their own sake. So it's what you feel when you're hiking. You're just so excited. Someone had mentioned hiking. It's what you feel when you're woodworking. You're just so engaged in the process that you just do it for its own sake, or knitting. All of these different things, you feel flow when you're doing them. And that's really the dream of teachers, is to have our students engaged in flow when they're learning. Has anyone here ever experienced flow in teaching or learning? And what was that lesson like? If someone would be willing to share, that would be great. And you can just unmute. Wait time is important.
I teach in a high school classroom, and I think that flow looks like when you totally lose track of time and you look up at the clock and you're like, oh my goodness, like where did the time go? And it doesn't really matter, what it is that you're doing, but just that complete like losing track of time.
Absolutely. That's a great example. Does anyone else want to add anything? Could take maybe one more.
I think also I completely agree with the losing time, but when the kids are so involved in an activity and they're like, you have to transition to the next thing, and they're like, do we have to stop? Do we have to stop working? I absolutely love those moments. And I'm like, well, rethinking my plans for the day.
Absolutely. And those are times where your students experience so much joy in their learning that the teacher experienced joy too. And that's really a premise of Finland. If your students are engaged in joyful learning, then chances are the teacher's engaged in joyful teaching, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. So for the study, I really am talking about freedom within a framework and giving teachers autonomy to choose from a joy menu. These are just some of the strategies on this for the purposes of this presentation, but there will be more on the joy menu. And really, I'm asking teachers to use these strategies that were designed to promote the physical, emotional, and mental health of teachers and students, and try to make their classrooms more joyful for 4 weeks. So thinking about how that might look in your classroom. And if you're on this call today, you may have zero interest in a study, but you may be thinking about how you could use these in your classrooms to make them more joyful. So let's think about joy. We often think about students that look like this and how they're excited or smiling or happy, and that's really obvious joy. But in a classroom setting, joy might look a little bit differently. So I'm going to real quick give you some examples of lessons that purposely incorporate some of these Finnish principles of joyful classrooms. And I want you to use your infographic to think about, as I'm talking, which of the ingredients of happiness or which principles of joyful teaching and learning are being utilized. So is it brain breaks? Is it learning on the move? So you will need that infographic. Was everyone able to access that? And you'll have to unmute if you weren't, just so that I know. Okay, I'm going to take silence as a yes, and so great. All right, so when I was an adjunct lecturer at Merrimack College in 2016, I had graduate and undergraduate students. This class was all graduates, and they were taking a course with me called Current Issues and Trends in ESL Education, so English learners. And what I realized was that I had micromanaged a lesson, and I was so excited to tell them everything they should be doing to support their English learners. But in my classroom, I had a student who was Cambodian, a student who was Spanish, and a student who was Arabic. And this was really a chance for me to get to know my learners better. And I thought, you know, I'm going to have these students immerse us in a 5-minute lesson in their native language. And we are going to be the English learners. And then we're going to debrief about how that feels. So my students taught the lesson, and we sat there, and I sat as a student, and afterwards we debriefed about what that experience was like. They were not allowed to use any English learner strategies to help us obtain the information. They were just supposed to teach like the sage on the stage, and we were supposed to listen. And then the second 5 minutes of their lesson, they were supposed to implement the strategies that we had been learning to support English learners in our classrooms. And at the very end of the 5-minute lesson, the second 5-minute lesson, we debriefed about that experience and how it felt to be a learner hearing a language that you had never heard before compared to how it felt to be a learner with the support strategies involved. So can someone think about some of these ingredients of happiness and some of these principles and identify which were utilized in this example of teaching with graduate students? Just shout them out, unmute and shout them out. Again, I can't see the chat.
I think belonging for sure.
Definitely. So there were no parameters given other than you had to teach for 5 minutes in your native language and then 5 minutes with strategies. Without strategies, then with strategies. So just the very nature of the lesson says that we're starting with freedom and providing autonomy. There was lots of margin for students to debrief and to reflect, and even during the lesson, what they might need to talk about. There was choice involved. Anything else that anyone's noticed? How about mastery? Mastery is often a tricky one. And we didn't really go deeply into it, but just from that story, can you tell what I was hoping that my students would obtain from the lesson?
Belonging.
Yeah, definitely belonging. I know it's Saturday morning and I'm putting everyone to work. Can anyone share what they think the goal of the lesson might be? What might the essential part of the lesson be? What was I hoping?
How about feeling seen and heard?
Yeah, definitely. Making sure that those students felt seen and heard, like at the very beginning of this. That's really part of a joyful experience.
I wonder.
All right, oh yeah, please.
About mastery. So it's coaching more. I mean, they were seeing a difference between just teaching and teaching for a purpose to help students catch on better.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we didn't even really touch upon coaching more, but the person who does the work does the learning. So since the graduate students were doing the work of the lesson, they were the ones really doing the learning. And that's something that Finnish educators know instinctively. They talk a lot about how they're really viewed more as a coach to support learning rather than just standing up and giving information for their learners to just passively absorb. Here's another example during COVID. it was a home learning suggestion of the day. When I was teaching exclusively virtually, I had kids collect sticks, go for a walk near your house, collect any sticks you could find, sort them in a way that made sense to you, count and compare quantities using words more or less. No worksheets, just a chore, get out, have some fresh air, do a math lesson, and keep a safe social distance. This is an old one. So can somebody please share what they notice, what some of the joyful strategies are in this lesson?
Autonomy.
Yep.
Let's say options, because they get to choose how to sort them and then explain
Definitely.
why they did that.
Movement.
For sure.
Breathe fresh air.
Yes.
Well-being, getting fresh air.
Definitely.
Belonging and play.
Awesome. Let's do another one. All right, here's a home learning tip of the day. This is the second of the two. It's brought to you by Molly. So Jiffy cornbread, 50 cents a box. Do a cooking activity, use some measurement, follow a recipe, enjoy some bread.
This one's definitely got movement and even an element of play there.
Definitely. And we didn't go over this one today. Meaningful activities and real work is also a really important component of teaching like Finland. Knowing what your students like, if they like cooking, if that's something that's really engaging for them. This activity was another one with undergraduate students, and having students identify words that describes their background, and then they created this visual to hang in our classroom.
Definitely belonging.
Definitely, that was a main part of that.
Displaying the student work.
Mm-hmm.
Choice.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of autonomy in this. There's a lot of margin. They got to decide how they wanted to create the display and what they wanted it to look like. Here's some choice boards for different lessons, just in case they could be modified for any grade, but one of the topics was what makes your family special, talking about families. You had choice in creating any of these, how you want to display it. You could make a list of all the holidays or events that your family celebrated. You could bring a book that your family liked to read together. You could share a picture of a place that your family likes to spend time together. For a book study, you could read a book and then create a magazine cover for it. And then there's another option for virtual learning where you would log into Epic and read at least one or two of those stories, and then compare them, one that's like your family, one that's different. And then you had 4 different ways that you could share out, including recording a video message to tell me about the families your family read about, observing a place outside for 15 minutes, and then telling a grown-up if you saw families that were similar or different, calling or FaceTiming someone you love and telling them about the books. So what are some things you see in these lessons?
Margaret, just only I know because you can't see the chat. Someone asked if you could turn the captions on.
Oh, I don't know. I probably can figure that out. Let me see. Thank you for letting me know that.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And Margaret, I know you can't see the chat, so a direct message won't work, but we have 6 minutes left.
Oh, thank you very much. How do I turn the captions on? Anyone?
I'll if someone knows, that's great, and if they don't, I'll play with it. Does anyone know how to turn the captions on?
Everyone can see me playing with this screen. Yeah, I typically haven't had that option, but I did in the last presentation. I'm very sorry that I am not sure how to do that. But thank you, Dr. Lavania, for kind of playing around with that.
Yep, I'll keep playing with it on my end, Margaret.
Okay,
Sorry
thank
about
you
that.
very much. No worries. Would anyone like to identify some of those ingredients of happiness or strategies of joy?
Belonging, mindset.
Autonomy.
Flow.
Yes, definitely. Super engaging for students. They get so caught up in it. They just want to keep going. Some other examples of voice and choice, being seen and heard. These are from college classes, a course reflection, giving options for a course reflection. How do you want to reflect to the course? Do you want to create a visual? Do you want to do a piece of writing? You know, what was your experience in that course? And I'm going to kind of go ahead here. And I want you to think about what might joy look like in your specific classroom. And if you'd be willing to unmute and share an example of a takeaway that you might be able to do for your own classroom, that'd be great.
I teach in high school, and I like the idea of using music, but I didn't know, it always comes to mind like what music. Like I know what music studies show are productive, but so often like what might be soothing and increased flow on my end is not really what the high school students like. So I didn't know if there was like some guidance on the idea of music,
Yeah.
like in those books.
When he talks about music, he also talks about the importance of understanding the level of background noise that your own students can handle and making sure that the flow that you might have is not disruptive to your students. He talks about using music in a way that you can pulse. So now we're going to take a rest. We're going to infuse 4 or 5 minutes of music, and then we're going to go back to our working state as an option if background music isn't always conducive. There's examples of some teachers just really aren't a big fan of words, so they use calm background music. Other teachers use drums to keep the beat or to maybe make some sort of transition with music. He does talk a lot about the fact that we know music is really great for learning, but it doesn't have to look the same way in every classroom, and it should really be what's in your comfort level. And if you prefer music for transitions, even just playing it when students switch from class to class might be an option. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Maybe like samples of variety, or playing it when they enter or exit the classroom, kind of taking from the students what their interests are, so you can kind of have a variety.
Sure. And then again, increasing that sense of belonging, asking your students to give you a list of a playlist might be another way to, I mean, of course you'd have to screen the music first.
I think that for the music, there are options also to have the music portion without the lyrics playing. So like on YouTube, so you can have the music without, someone singing, or especially for like the high school level, and myself for middle school kids who, their music isn't always school appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. We use acoustic music right now when we're trying to get that peace, keeping the peace with my littles. We use it during our writing workshop, and we put it on softly in the background. But definitely different music for different times. Are there any menu strategies that really stand out that you think you might be willing to implement that would be a change?
Well, I teach 6th grade, and I do a game called Four Corners. And when we do that, I play some like show tunes and stuff like that. They really enjoy that.
Nice. It's a good one. Anyone else?
I'm an undergraduate student right now, and I'm placed in a 3rd and 4th grade special ed resource room. And we struggle to like find time to do brain breaks, but I've been trying to implement that more, and it's made a big difference in my students.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I hope that you do have some takeaways, and I hope that you will consider putting some joy into your classrooms. I will be having a lot more information to send out to people. Even if you're not interested in being involved in the study, you're welcome to put your email address down. If you click the last link on your infographic, it is here. It says click here to request more information about the study. If you click here, you can submit a Google form. It's just a couple of very quick questions. And I am happy to send you information on being a participant, but there will also be just some information that you could always gather. And then if you want to come to more information from a virtual meeting that will be scheduled at a later date, please feel free to do so. And even if you just come to get the information, you don't necessarily have to join the study, but you might be inspired to. And so is there any other questions I can answer or any concerns? I hope you had things to take away from this presentation.
I tried to click on that link and it says I need permission.
Are you in your school email?
That's
Because
into
it's,
the Google form.
Yeah, so the form can only be viewed by users in the organization, in the owner's
I
organization.
changed it. Hold on, let me see.
If you want, Margaret, you can share the link with Beth. Because she's going to be emailing everyone an evaluation form.
Okay.
And so she will be able to share this again.
Okay. I
If we
might be able to.
want to reshare it.
Okay. Let me just try real quick to do the permission one more time, and then I can certainly do that if it doesn't
If
work.
it doesn't.
I'm not sure why that is.
And Beth can test drive it too.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll make sure that everybody gets that link, Margaret.
Okay. Yeah, sure. That's no problem. Oh, yep. Anyone with the link. Never mind. Maybe it's mad. So I tried that. Hopefully that works. But if not, then I will definitely share it, Dr. Levine.
Okay, great. If you would, Margaret, stop sharing screen.
Sure.
Okay, everyone, it's 11:02, and thank you so much for being part of this session. It's wonderful to see so many people logged on here. The next session begins at 11:15, and much like we did before, you're going to leave this particular Zoom room and click on to the Zoom, click on the link for the session that you would like to attend next. We've recorded the meeting, and someone said, can you share the chat? I will try to do that. And thank you all so much. So we'll see you. I'll see some of you in the next session. And thank you, Margaret. That was really wonderful. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. Okay. Thanks, everybody.